Okay, let's get rolling. We talked last time, we did World War I, and then we did the Roaring Twenties after that, and then we did the Great Depression after that. You know, all of these are, you know, the 1910s, 1920s, the 1930s. Keep in mind, when you talk about the 20s and 30s, if someone uses the term boom and bust, the boom is the Roaring Twenties, the bust is the Great Depression, which we just talked about. And now we're going to get out of the Great Depression to some degree, depends on who you talk to, when you talk about the New Deal. And so we're assessing the impact of the New Deal reforms in enlarging the role of the federal government in American life. So you can debate whether the New Deal got us out of the Great Depression or not. Some people say that it didn't do enough. Some people said World War II is what got us out. But what you can guarantee is that the New Deal leads us to bigger federal government, what we have today. And I think we're living in times that show exactly what big government does, that we rely on it and things. I mean, you look at all the things that has taken place now. We are, instead of looking at what Hoover would do, rugged individualism, you know, tighten up your bootstrap, you lost your job, go find another job, or, you know, what have you. Now we're looking for a stimulus package, you know, come by and get lunch here at the school and things like that. And I'm not saying one way is right or the other. I'm just saying that that is what we've come to rely on with the government, okay? So in 1932 is when we have our presidential election, and of course people are just suffering, they're having a hard time. You know, a quarter of the workforce is unemployed. So, you know, we look at today, we're at 3 to 4%, depending on where you are. At that time, it was 25%. 1 out of every 4 Americans was out of work. So that's a tough time. And so, of course, Herbert Hoover is the incumbent. He is for the Republicans, and they renominate him. You know, now, here's the deal. They know that he's not going to win. But it is if you do not nominate your incumbent, it shows that your 4 years have been a failure. So it's going to be hard for that new guy to win anyhow. So you might as well go ahead and put the incumbent up there, say that things will be better, then, you know, brighter times are around the corner, things like that. So they do Hoover, but of course, too many people blame Hoover that he had not done enough, even though he did do some federal government things. But they want a new president, and you can't blame them. You know, if things are not working, new president, it's that old saying, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Very few people were better off than they were 4 years ago. So the Democrats are going to choose Franklin, FDR. Franklin Roosevelt. He is a 2-term governor of New York, has done well in New York, and here's the key, he is a reform-minded leader. You know, Hoover, we said, rugged individualism, just wait for the cycle to come back around. Roosevelt does not look at things like that. He says he believes in big government. What can the government do? He does also have more of a, I think he does have a connection with people, a can-do. We're going to get things done. Everybody, you know, instead of rugged individualism, you do what's best for you, it is we're going to do this. And I think that's a huge thing when you're looking at arguments. He has that can-do attitude, friendliness, confidence, and he wins overwhelmingly. 23 million to 16 million. And that may not look like a lot. If you got $23 or $16, that's not a huge difference. But when you're talking millions of people voting, that is huge. So there's Roosevelt. Of course, he is going to have the distinction of the only person that's going to be elected as president 4 times. 32, 36, 40, and 44. And of course, he dies before he serves this term. So he's elected 4 terms, really only serves 3 terms, then he dies. Of course, his vice president is Harry Truman. Okay? If you look at it, here's Roosevelt going around in the backseat. He did this all the time. He was a really good speaker. As I said, he had a connection with people. Of course, why does he go around in a car? He goes around in a convertible all the time. Why does he do that? Why does he not just walk around? Many of you know it's because he had polio. He was in a wheelchair most of the time. When he did go and make speeches where he was standing, he would have leg braces, basically to just hold him up and stuff. So you see him, rare picture of him in a wheelchair. There was only a couple, because he made sure that if they were taking a picture of him, he was at least sitting down and there'd be that doubt. He did not want to show any signs of weakness, which he thought that was. And if I'm not mistaken, there's no videotape of him in a wheelchair. But I may be wrong on that. And then, of course, he is married to Eleanor Roosevelt. That is his wife. They're distant cousins. Everybody always talks about their cousins. Yeah, they're like fourth, fifth cousins, so it's not that big a deal. But they are both from affluent families. So they've got money living in New York. They are wheelers and dealers, the shakers, so to speak, on the political scene. Now, I like Eleanor. She is a pretty famous first lady because she does so many reform things. And that's, I think, a big thing with them. They see things pretty eye to eye, that they're going to do things for the common man. And, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt is really big into civil rights for African Americans. And she's going to do some things that are really good for that. I think it's one of those things where, because of the context of the times, that Franklin couldn't do it, but she could be in the first lady. So that's a huge thing. And so she loved children. They never had children, but she loved children. We go out to orphanages all the time and do things and stuff. And then this is probably one of her most famous things. Mary Ann Anderson was a famous opera singer. And the Daughters of the American Revolution had a concert hall right there in Washington, D.C. And I don't know how the mix-up took place, but they booked her to come and sing at their convention. And when she got there, they told her, you can't come in the building and sing. So, I don't know where the disconnect came, who set up the contract or whatever. But anyhow, she realized that she's not going to be able to go in and sing in this convention center that the Daughters of the American Revolution had built for their meetings. So it gets back to Eleanor, and Mary Ann refuses to sing now, don't blame her. And so what they do is they set up a concert at the Lincoln Memorial. That's the Lincoln Memorial behind her. And she does a free outdoor concert. And she, like I say, she is this famous opera singer. So that just gives you an idea of the things that Eleanor did to try to right the wrongs that are taking place in American society. And we mentioned this the other day in one of our other notes about the fireside chats, that Roosevelt would do this. He would, even today, our presidents do I think it's every Friday, they do a radio speech, some kind of radio address is probably the right word to use. And then that is sent over to all our military around the world. And it's on, what's it called? United Arms Network, something like that. And it goes around. Every now and then you'll hear one of our radio stations play, but not very often. But he starts all that on it. Every week he would talk to the American public. He would do the fireside chats where he would be next to the fireplace talking about it. And one of the things he talked about was, here we are in the Great Depression, but here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to get out of it. I've got this new program called the New Deal. Here's what it's going to do for you. So it was tremendous in that it gave confidence to the American people. And here is the New Deal. Now let me just tell you, this is the most important slide in what we're doing today. Make sure you write everything down. The New Deal, and it is the New Deal, it is relief, recovery, and reform, the 3 R's. So you got Teddy Roosevelt with the Square Deal, you got Roosevelt with the New Deal, and then later on we're going to talk about some others, the Great Society, and all that stuff. But look at this here. This is the main topics: relief, recovery, and reform. And if you think about it, anytime we have a disaster in America, that is how we look at things, which is an amazing thing. Relief, immediate action taken to halt the economy's deterioration. Right now we're talking about sending out a stimulus where every person gets $1,000, the head of the household gets $1,000 for every kid, another $500. That is immediate relief. What can you do to help me eat today? He knew he needed that. Now, recovery. All right, what can we do that's not short term, but not real long term, but something to prime the pump, get things going? And so they're temporary programs to restart the flow of consumer demand. Give you an example. They're talking now about if you are a small business, we're going to give you a stimulus for the business, even a zero interest loan, so that you can get through this. It is temporary, because you're not going to get it every year. It is just there to help you get through this thing. So that would be a recovery. And then this is one that I think Roosevelt's probably known for the most, and that is reform. How can we change things? How did we get here? What were the problems that got us here? And so let's take those things and change them so that we don't ever have this again. And we're going to talk about some of those today. We still have things today that started here. The biggest example is Social Security. Social Security is a reform movement. Take the retired people so they're not having to work all their lives. Take them out of the job force. We're going to help them. And now you have newer, younger people in the job force. And then what they're making helps pay for that Social Security. But that's just one of the things. We'll talk about several of them. So those are the 3 R's: immediate relief, recovery, this is kind of medium range, what do we do to help out, and then long-term things. So there are the 3 R's. Now I will say this, not everyone was on board with the New Deal. And that's one of the things, hopefully, as an AP group you understand. Because most of the time when you talk to people, even people in college who are history majors, they may not realize that the New Deal was not popular with everybody. And so what you see here, this is, Uncle Sam, he's sitting here, he's sick. Well, what do you do when you're sick? You try medicine. Well, what you do, if you still got the sniffles and stuff, and you see somebody else and they say, oh yeah, I had it a couple of weeks ago, but I tried this. You go and try new medicines. And so if you look here on the table next to him, it's got all the different agencies that he's going to create. And up here he says, of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results. So these are his remedies, the New Deal remedies, FDR. This is Congress. Because of course Congress is going to have to approve and give money for all the things he does. So what he's saying is we're going to try all this stuff. It may not work, but we're going to keep trying other things. So there's your analogy. That's a really good political cartoon to be able to know. So the first step is to carry out reforms in banking and finance. And this is one that we still have today. Well, one, not this one. The first thing he's going to do, remember in the last one we talked about with the Great Depression, It's a Wonderful Life, and the folks come in and they demand all their money from the banks and stuff. And the banks just don't have it because they've loaned it out. But and you got to think about it. Today, that doesn't surprise me. But the mindset of people back in the 1930s was different. And they thought, if I went to the bank, all my money should be there. And so what he's going to do is he's going to declare a bank holiday, because everybody's having a run on the banks. He is going to shut down the banks for 4 days. You cannot go get your money. Your money is still there. It's still good, but you can't get it. What he is hoping will happen is in those 4 days, people's anxieties of my money will calm down, the economy will get better, and he's just doing anything he can to get people not to have hysteria of my money is gone. So that is a big thing to stop that, okay? So Congress is going to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And what they're going to do is once they close it down, they're then going to send in, like, what word did I use up here? Inspectors. Inspectors to go in each bank, see how much money they have on hand, how many loans do they have, are the loans good, bad, and if they determine that your bank is okay, what they call solvent, I think solvent is up there somewhere, should be, there's insolvent. Insolvent means you're not good, you're not carrying out business, you don't have enough money to do what you need as a bank. So if they determine that you're solvent, you can open back up. If your bank is in terrible shape, they're going to keep it closed. Your money is still good, but they're going to keep it closed for a while. And so by doing this, it showed the people that the government is getting involved with the banks. Because keep in mind, banks were totally privately run. This shows that the government's going to come in and kind of be a backup for them. And then this is one you need to know. It is still here. You'll see that there'll be several of them where I'll have this here. So what they do is they come in and say, all right, for every bank, and you'll see this, if you go to any bank, on the doors you go in, it will see FDIC insured. FDIC stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And what that means is that the federal government has your back. If something happens to your bank, if it goes out of business, your money is good. The federal government will pay it. If there's a bank robbery, don't worry about it. Your money is still good, which is the difference. We talked about Al Capone, and if you watch some of the movies, some of them were about the bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde, and Pretty Boy Floyd, and all that. Well, when they stole your money, money was gone. You lost. And that's why people would be out in the streets risking their lives to stop them. With FDIC, they tell them, don't worry about stopping bank robbers. Your money is good to go. And so what they did then is it was up to $5,000. As long as you only had $5,000 in the bank, and we're talking 1930s money, so that's a chunk of change. It was good. Today, still there today, $250,000. And you can have 250 grand in the credit union, 250 in BB&T, 250,000 in another bank, and all that is good. So you're set with that FDIC. All right? So like I said, it's still there today. This is along the way. It was 100,000 at one time, and now I just checked this morning, it's up to $250,000. There's another one that's still here today. Deals with stock markets. The Securities and Exchange Commission, to police the stock market by regulating the sale of stocks and bonds. One of the big things they do is regulate inside trading. So let's say that I work for a company, like, look, I don't know, let's say a medical company, and all of a sudden I know that we're coming out with a new drug, I know it's going to get congressional approval. I can't tell anybody, because then everyone will go and buy stocks. Once that drug comes out and it's approved by Congress, it's going to shoot through the roof. And so you can't do that. That's called insider trading. And that is what the Securities and Exchange Commission investigates. Did someone do this? Here's just what a stock would look like. If you had a stock, and of course the way stocks work, if you buy this at $100, and then in 5 years, that share of stock might be $150. Well, if you own 10 of them, turn it in, now you've made $500. You get your money back from the original investment of $1,000, and now you get 500 more. And so what they do, and the big thing, we've just had this happen. We've got some senators and representatives in Congress. One's from North Carolina, Byrd, Senator Byrd, who sold stock in airlines, hotels, all that, right around the time the coronavirus has hit. And so now there's a question of, did they find out before the American public about this coronavirus coming over, what the effects were going to have on the economy, and therefore they sold millions of dollars worth of stock just before the stock market plummeted. So they are actually being investigated to see if they knew something ahead of time. And they could get in some major trouble. Probably the most famous is Martha Stewart, who was at a party and was talking to some guys about some stock she had. Somebody worked for one of the companies and told her that you need to sell the stock because something, I think it was something they were going to put out, was not going to get approved or didn't have the effects they thought it was. So she sold it before it plummeted. And she actually went to jail for it, Martha Stewart, the housekeeping person. Another one that is not around today, but something similar, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And so here's what they did. We've talked about, gosh, supply and demand all year long, right? So if you have a ton of crops, which we said we did, of course we got a ton of crops, but not as much demand because now Europe doesn't need the crops, what's going to happen to the price? It's going to plummet. So Roosevelt said, okay, well, we can't do much about the demand, but we can take out the supply. And what they start doing is paying farmers not to grow crops. By doing that, it eliminates the surpluses. It's going to take away the supply, and now the demand for it is up. You look at our coronavirus. The price of Perel and all that sanitation stuff, Clorox, its stock has quadrupled in the last week because the demand is up and now the supply is gone. And so that's creating prices to go up. Well, Roosevelt thought if we tell all these farmers don't grow as much, they're not going to do it unless we pay them. So we'll pay them some money. They can grow a little bit of crop, but not a lot. And that is going to eventually raise prices. Now, you know, I've seen that happen. When I was growing up as a tobacco farmer, my dad, you know, you got the tobacco stalk out there. And what they did one year to bring the prices up, the supply down, is they paid us to go out there and the bottom 5 leaves, we just had to knock off and leave on the ground. And then you had to have an inspector come out. He just stood at the road, looked at your field. Okay, you did what he told you to do. And now they wrote a check for us right there for really doing nothing but going out there and messing up the tobacco. So that was kind of cool, but it rose the prices, so that was what you're doing. So one of the things that happens is the Supreme Court didn't like it. Supreme Court has big problems with Roosevelt because they, you know, you think back to Jefferson and Hamilton, the interpretation of the Constitution. Is there anywhere in the Constitution where it says you can pay someone to do nothing? No. And so the Supreme Court had a problem with everything just about that Roosevelt was doing. And the fact that he was taking money from what was in this budget and moving it here to pay the farmers and other ones. So he was moving money around. So you got an interpretation of the Constitution, and then you've got how he was moving money around. But he thought, I've got to move money where it is needed the most. You know, that would be like if Mr. Ward had some money, let's say he had $1,000 for an end of the year faculty party. But all the faculty said, no, we want to use that money for something in the classrooms or something the students could use. Right? He would move that money over. But the Supreme Court looked at it as that $1,000 is earmarked for your end of the year party. We usually have an end of the year party. Sometimes it has a lot, sometimes not so much. So if you look, these are the farmers. They just come in and they're getting a check for not growing anything. Okay? Look at this. I did this last year. I went back and looked to find out. This just shows you the enormity of what is going on. They take 6 million hogs and they shoot them and bury them. Just think about it, 6 million hogs. Think about all the barbecue, pork chop, ribs, all that. And keep in mind, you have a country that is full of hungry people, homeless people, people living in the Hooverville still, that are starving, that they could have shot and then gave it to those people. But Roosevelt said, no, that will not take care of what we need to take care of. So 6 million hogs were killed. In Nebraska, 470,000 cows were destroyed. So they just take the cows off, shoot them, and bury them right there. 10.4 million acres of cotton, already grown cotton, were plowed under to bring the supply down, bring the demand up, and that way next year the prices will be better. Prices are going to be pretty good that year if you're one of the ones who are allowed to do it. So all these folks who lose their hogs, cows, cotton, etc., they're getting paid. We have the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is still here. And what that is all along, I'll go here for a second, all along what we call the Tennessee Valley. It's got all these rivers. And so what they would do is they would go in and they would flood control it using dams. That way people could have farmland. But what happens too with the dams in there is this the type of dams that through hydroelectric energy connects electricity. So you would have those dynamos basically spinning when the water was coming through. And then they could sell the electricity to all those folks in the Tennessee Valley area. Because one of the things is all these little red things are the dams. And these are power plants. It's going to come later on, not now. But that's going to be one of the things that's going to help people with electricity. All right? It is very successful. It is still there today. If you go there today, all these, I wouldn't say all, most of these dams are still functional. Still functional. All right? The NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, all right? Look at this, more progressive reform. Set a minimum wage, maximum hours, conditions, and recognizing unions. You can see Roosevelt is progressive. So he is setting this up. Once again, later on considered unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Here's the deal though, by the time they determine this unconstitutional, it's already running, it's already going. And so what people do is the reforms that it is trying to push in the industrial world, it's going to keep. So it's for the industrial workers, industry. All right, and if you look, what would happen is you would get this sign, which is, I look at it as propaganda. We do our part. We do our part. And so what it does, they put it in restaurants, industries, all that. These are going to be the reform movements. And so now, even when the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, these folks leave it in the window. And now the common people patron that business instead of the other businesses. It looks at it as if you are patriotic. The Civilian Conservation Corps. And this is one of my favorites. So what they would do, let's say that you guys are all at home and you're not going to school, mom and dad's unemployed, they're having a hard time feeding you. Well, what they would do, and I think I've got ages are like 16 to 25 or something like that. And what they would do is they'd take you out of the home, they may take you somewhere to Virginia or something like that, and you would work, you'd be on a work compound. You'd live in a tent, live in a tent, they would feed you, and then they would pay you $30 a month. But here's the cool thing, you would then send 25 of it home. So by doing that, you are now fed, you're now learning a craft or a trade, a skill, and then your money goes home to the family so that they can help feed those kids. So it was really, really a good thing. This is where we get a lot of national parks, reservoirs, reforestation done. I'll tell you this quick example. So years ago, my sons were like 10 and 8. And let me just tell you, every family vacation, when we went, so we had to go to a museum. That was like my vacation part. And they complained all the time about it. So one year we're going to go to Pocahontas National Park in Virginia. And I tell them, I'm not going to any museum. We're going to this park. It's got rafting, it's got swimming, outdoor stuff. There's no museum anywhere near there. And they're like, good. I mean, they're so happy and all that stuff. And lo and behold, the Pocahontas National Park was built by the CCC. And so what they did is they put a museum there of how they built things at the Pocahontas National Park. I honestly did not know it. They swear to this day that I knew it, but I didn't. And of course, but while it's there, we might as well go to it. But it was really just some tents set up, and it showed what they did, how they lived, and stuff like that. But boy, they were pretty mad. And I didn't make them stay long, just so you know. All right, but that was really a cool one. We don't have that anymore. But it did teach, guys a trade, a skill, and things like that. So if you look at it, they're putting brick roadways, walkways, things like that. We probably have a lot of things here in North Carolina done by the CCC. Now, one of the things that happens, you kind of figured this out now. Before Roosevelt, we tried to have what's called a balanced budget, where if we brought in $100 million, we can spend $100 million. Okay? We've gotten away from that. Roosevelt is the guy that gets us away from that. It's what we call deficit spending, which means you spend more than the government takes in. But Roosevelt felt you had to do that to prime the pump. And one of the things that happens is a lot of economists thought, yes, that is the right thing to do. You want to be balanced if everything is going great. But if it's not, you've got to prime the pump. To prime the pump, you need money. And so John Maynard Keynes, which is an economist, recommended deficit spending, and he said that that would work. So we really don't know if it would have worked in the long term because of World War II. But I will say this, it was putting people to work, putting money in their pockets, food on the table. So that, that was a positive that was taking place. Now, if you look here, this shows you where we are at deficit spending. So if you see, Roosevelt starts the deficit spending in here. Now, in fairness to Roosevelt, what he would say is, not only did I have to pay for the New Deal, I had to pay for World War II. And usually during wars you spend more money anyhow. But then you look at it, this, we're not doing bad. And then right in here, Jimmy Carter, we started getting up. Then you look at Reagan. Then you look at Bush, Clinton. Bush going up even more. And then, of course, with Obama, it goes up more. And with Trump, it goes up even more. So this is what we call our national debt. And as you see, it just becomes in the 70s, right in here, it just becomes huge. Where now, we'll probably never get that down. Because think about this. If I wanted to run for president, and I said, look, my goal as president is to get this back down to where we used to be. But the only way we're going to do that is I'd have to tax you more and cut away programs. I'm going to have to cut Social Security, welfare, Pell Grant for education. I got to cut all that to get it down. Is anybody going to elect me? No. So they don't even talk about it now. Now, the one thing that happened, if you look at this, so, excuse me, this is your deficit spending looking at it the other way. But one of the things I want to point out to you is Bill Clinton. We get back up here. We're in the black. But Bill Clinton's smart. Just like I just said, he could not run on the fact that he's going to try to undo all this. He just says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure in my budget I spend no more than I take in. And he does. So what he does, what this signifies is for those few years there with Clinton as president, we don't spend more than we bring in. Now, he doesn't try to even touch this right here, the deficit that was already there by somebody else. Doesn't try to touch it. But what he can now run on is that while I was president, I didn't spend more than I brought in. And then, of course, as you look, as soon as Bush comes in, it goes right back down. So what is the response to the New Deal? Well, the Supreme Court reacts. As I said, they think it's unconstitutional. So what he wants to do is what's called court packing. Now, Roosevelt does not get along with the Supreme Court. And so he looks at them as 9 old men, and they are. They're between the ages of 61 and 70-something. 6 of them are 70 and over. So he looks at them as too conservative. They're not part of the reform movement. So what he wants to do is he wants to either force them to retire if you're over 70, or if you will not retire, then I get to bring in another younger guy. So now instead of 9, we have 10. If I got another guy to 74 and he won't retire, I bring in another guy, younger guy, more progressive. Now we have 11. Well, that never gets done because everybody's like, all right, what you're trying to do is pack the court. And that's the term you need to know, court packing or packing the court. Now, some judges eventually do retire. Some of them actually, over time, see that what Roosevelt is doing is at least a chance to figure this thing out. So eventually, he is able to get most of his things passed. But early on, it is a struggle with the Supreme Court. So if you look here, all I said was give me 6 more justices. And even the donkey, the Democrats, are raising Cain about that. All right, over here, this is one of my favorite ones, is that this is the packed court, where if you brought in 5 more guys, they would be like little puppets. Because that's one of the things, you look at Trump, he's appointed 2, Obama appointed 2. What you want to do is have a couple, a few that are conservative, a few that are liberal. And what Roosevelt would have done was brought in guys that were like puppets, that were all going to be reform guys. And then they would be able to sway the vote. And so here, that's what that shows. And then, of course, this too. It's about once I get the court I wanted, they would all be yes men. Okay, so that's what he was looking for in the Supreme Court. We got the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, which gave unions recognition, right to collective bargaining, still here today. Just going through some of these. The Fair Labor Standard Act, which is going to establish the minimum wage, limit child laborers to 16 and 18. If you're, this is where you get the thing where some of you may work, but you can't do this or you can't do that. You have to be a certain age to run like a meat slicer. Back in the day, driving a forklift, you had to be 16 to drive a forklift when I was working somewhere. And look at that minimum wage, 25 cents an hour. That was minimum wage. Think about that. Maximum work week of 44 hours. So you had to work 44 hours and then get overtime. And really, they were not doing much time and a half. They hadn't really come around yet. Probably the big one that's still here today is Social Security. All right, and that was by a lady named Frances Perkins. She's actually the first female that was in the cabinet. She was the Secretary of Labor, and she wanted to do it to aid not only the retired people, but disabled, dependent children. You know what happens if your father's passed away and you have a single mother now. Not that she wanted to be single, but things happen. So now, until you're 18, you get that money that your dad would have got for Social Security. Same thing with the mom, okay? So this is to help people, and of course you pay for that today if you got a part-time job. Even that is coming out. That is coming out of mine today. I don't know if I'll ever see the amount that I have put in. Now you think about it, I think they did it one time. If instead of paying Social Security, if I'd taken that money, I put in, I think, $180,000 into Social Security. And if I'd invested that just in a savings account, I would have almost $250,000. Think about that. I could retire with something like that. Okay? Couldn't retire on it. I couldn't quit working. But it would help me some. But of course, the present day ramifications, well, it has set up what we call a welfare state. And it is a present day debate. Now think about this. The term welfare is not a bad term. Even though some people use it as a bad term. It's not. What welfare meant then was that if I'm here and you're here, what can we do to help the welfare of your living to bring you up to here? Or at least, right in here. We didn't want the gap to be this long. We wanted to bring you up in here. And so when they used the term welfare back in the day, it just simply meant to bring others back up to where, they're able to have a living. Over time, we've used the term welfare to mean, unemployment, disability, food stamps, all that, and sometimes it gets a negative connotation. Back then, it was not. But we still have a debate on that today. And there's the poster, probably I've seen in most tests with Social Security. More security for the American family. And what it does, really the way they sold it, it was for older people. But it is also for dependents, disabled, things like that. Okay? So we're going to stop there and then I'll pick up.